Thanks for watching this review of the Boker Magnum Challenger. This is a short, fixed blade neck knife that is just under 5 inches overall. The blade length is 2 inches and features a two-tone finish. The blade steel is just under 1/8 of an inch thick, and the knife weighs about 1.6 ounces. The blade steel is 440A, which according to Boker is a decent starter steel. The G10 handles leave a little bit of the blade stock sticking out, but are still comfortable and allow for some extra heft on the back of the handle. It does feature a lanyard hole, and the most attractive thing to me about this knife is how flat it is. It's a very low profile carry, and the kydex sheath retains the blade perfectly. It does have some rattle, as you can hear and see, but this will not come out. Might make some noise, but the sheath will retain the blade. And it does feature a solid thunk upon closure. You can see I've already opted to switch the beaded breakaway chain that comes with the knife for a simple shoestring lanyard. I've talked before in other knife reviews about why I dislike this material. The fact that it does break intentionally, I do understand, and of course the design is practical in nature, but I would much prefer a noiseless, perhaps sturdier material. And even this old shoestring that I'm using temporarily, this was purely for the sake of getting rid of that noisy chain. I understand that this poses a certain risk if it gets stuck on something or caught, or if somebody pulls it down, that a lot of times your head and neck will end up sort of following suit, and I'm just hoping to avoid most situations like that. But of course, if I was ever wearing a neck knife intentionally around my neck, then that's a consideration that I would make. A very elegant solution to that problem was a breakaway clasp that attached to a paracord lanyard that was featured on the Chaman Mikra neck knife that I reviewed a while back. But anyway, I wanted to at least highlight some of the positive features of this knife. Most noticeably, it is small, it's very lightweight, it is a cheaper knife. This one comes in at about $24. I would certainly not recommend going any smaller than this. I actually prefer many 3-finger knives to slightly larger knives. However, the handle shape makes it so that this little point, I suppose, in between the arches here, maybe it's supposed to go in between like this or like this, but I find that my middle finger wants to rest right on that sort of pointier place. It's still smooth, it's not uncomfortable, it's barely worth mentioning. I just thought if you were considering the number of fingers or the shape of the hand, I wouldn't have come up with this, I don't think. However, the size and weight and the capabilities of the knife, I would still consider this a worthwhile purchase. Probably put a lanyard on there just for my pinky to have something to grab onto, a little extra. But overall, for what you're getting and what you're paying for, this is a very decent product, a very decent neck knife. The kydex sheath is nothing to complain about. It does its job. The only thing I would mention is that there is not a place for moisture to come out of the end. If it was to fill up with water, you would just simply have to tip it back over. Some might be able to weep out of the sides there, but I doubt it. It's not made for that. So that's the only other consideration I would have made on the sheath, but otherwise it does its job. It's an inexpensive knife, and it seems to be sturdy enough for what you're getting, for what it is. There are some knives that I thought I would mention in this review. Of course, I didn't hang on to them. I was shopping at Knife Center, which is based in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and I picked up 4 neck knives or smaller fixed blade knives that I was at least keen to get my hands on and feel for myself, and I wanted to at least mention them in this video to explain why I ended up returning them and didn't like them. Thanks very much to Knife Center for having a generous return policy. Of course, you do have to pay your own return shipping, but that's the price you pay for being able to handle a knife and decide whether or not you want to make it a part of your collection. There's nothing wrong with the knives inherently that I'm about to mention. It's just my own personal preference, and I felt like I was disappointed in what I got for a number of different reasons, which I'll go into now. The first one was the Boker Magnum Nano neck knife. Very similar concept to the Challenger here, but it was obviously much smaller. This knife came in, I think, overall at 1.6 inches. It also featured 448 steel, a Kydex sheath. It was just too small to be an effective tool. This Challenger, I think I said before, this is about as small as I would go. And purely because you want a knife to be a capable tool and you don't want to have to worry about hurting yourself in the process of using it. And when you get into something that's much smaller than this, at least with my hands and for what I expect from a knife, I felt like anything much smaller than this was just going to be too much of a hassle and a risk to deal with. So the Boker Magnum Nano neck knife, it came with some rust on the tip of the blade, and it was small, and because I could return it, I returned it. The next one was the Cold Steel Super Edge. It features a very thin, serrated blade, craton handle, kind of an oddly shaped sheath. The knife clicks in very smoothly and is secure, but when I removed it from the sheath, I noticed that the blade itself was cutting into the plastic of the sheath. And it wasn't a function of how I was inserting it or whether or not it was straight on. No matter how I tried to pull it in or out, I ended up cutting into the sheath with the blade steel. And I know for a fact that it wasn't designed that way. So I was surprised that that's what I got from the Cold Steel Super Edge. The next one, which is probably not as much of a surprise, would be the Tekna Xtra Edge. This is a small water sports keyring knife. It's about 1.5 inches long, very cheap plastic, cheap even at $15. I was sort of negatively surprised with that one as well. It just looked and felt super junky, and I wasn't even sure, I didn't even use it, but I wasn't sure that I could cut through a carrot without working the blade out of the plastic somehow. The last one, and probably the biggest disappointment that I received from Knife Center, and not that it was their fault necessarily, but there was a CRKT Folts Minimalist cleaver neck knife. Very sturdy fixed blade neck knife that features a Kydex sheath with great retention, and that's noted by many knife reviewers. I didn't like the cleaver shaped blade. I thought I would appreciate it, but I didn't end up liking it at all, given the application of being a neck knife. And I also noticed that one of the screws was missing on the handle. So it made me think maybe quality control missed that one, or I'm not really sure. It's not an expensive knife. That one I think comes in at somewhere between $25 and maybe $40 on the higher end. So I'll probably give it another try, but I'm definitely going to skip the cleaver blade option and go with the more traditional drop point, or I guess clip point version that they have. Anyway, I felt like mentioning those because I was at least interested in them while I was shopping around. All of them are much smaller than this knife. My hands are not extremely large. I could wear a large size glove, but I prefer a medium sized glove because they fit much tighter, and that's just my personal preference. But if you can't get 3 fingers on a knife, or even 2 really, I mean, most of the gripping and the locking is happening with my index finger and my thumb, very similar to the Spyderco ARK. However, there is enough of the handle for me to get more grip and control, and if I really had to grip it and I was in a tense situation or had to cut something quickly or with purpose, there's enough of this knife to hold on to, even without any jimping on the top of the blade, that I could use it as a tool and feel like I wasn't going to hurt myself or my hand in the process, and it was going to be an effective cutting tool. However, something a little bit smaller than this even with a similar sized blade, without as much handle there to grab onto, I felt like I was sacrificing control and leverage that was more important to me than having something that compact. So this knife comes in at just under 5 inches overall, and I would say that's really the perfect size as far as what I'm looking for in a neck knife. Small enough to hold in my hand, but big enough to be a part of my everyday carry and everyday life. The 440 steel should hold up to sharpening and edge retention and a little bit of corrosion and wear. It's not the greatest steel, as Boker said, but it should be easy to sharpen, and hopefully this two-tone black coating on the blade area, the cutting area there, will allow for some corrosion and wear resistance, but time and use will tell. Otherwise, I've perfectly enjoyed having and carrying this knife for the last several days. It's certainly sturdy, certainly capable, and it's cheap enough that if I lost it, or if something happened to it, or if the steel ended up disappointing me for whatever reason, I'm not invested a half week's pay in a knife that I can't or won't enjoy using. So overall, I would certainly recommend, and for the price, it's, I would say, a bargain. If you have never carried a neck knife, or if you have an interest in trying something new, certainly start out on the lower end of things. My first purchase for a neck knife was the Spyderco Always Ready knife, and I would say I've purchased 3 or 4 neck knives since then that I've enjoyed carrying, and the last of which I will enjoy doing a review for. That'll be the Boker Plus Rhino. It's another fixed blade, short neck knife. It does feature a Kydex sheath, and it is designed by Jesper Voxnaes, who is one of my favorite folks. If it's in your budget, in your interest, you probably won't be disappointed by adding it to your collection, and it won't cost you an arm and a leg to do so. Excellent job by Boker and their Magnum line. This is one of several smaller fixed blade neck knives that they offer. However, I would say that this is the most capable and the most worth your money. Thanks very much for watching, and as always, enjoy your knives.